Hi, I'm Dr. David Allen, author and professor of psychiatry at the University of Tennessee. Now, I'm going to be talking about this woman in the background, Rosie the Riveter, because she may have some relevance to something that you may be experiencing. Now, have you ever felt like you were shortchanging both your children and your place of work as you tried to, quote, have it all, and that having it all was a lot more difficult than some people in the media seem to believe it was? Because as we all know, there's only so many hours of the day, and you can't be in two places at once. So it's difficult. Plus, you're hearing all these messages from both sides of the political spectrum that feed into this by saying that you're neglecting your children, that they need you to have a good life, and that's not going to happen. And on the other hand, you have some feminists that think that women who stay at home and become full time mothers are somewhat lesser human beings and don't deserve much attention. So, again, under the best of circumstances, this is very difficult. But there's another issue that feeds into this guilt and is a big one, but it's seldom talked about in the media. And that is the attitude of your parents. Now, I'm not here to blame your parents for all of your problems because the problem I'm talking about is something that's been passed down to subsequent generations from prior generations and has affected everyone in the family. So there's no one person that's at fault or to blame. But nonetheless, it's a problem. So what happened? Well, let's go back 180 years, which is not that long ago in human history. Back then, most people worked on farms and they used their children as their farm help. So the more children you had, that you tended to be richer because you had farm help. And women, therefore, felt like they should stay home and have a lot of babies, especially since there was a high infant mortality rate and there were no modern conveniences to make raising the kids easier either, because there were no microwave ovens, and, daycare centers and things like that. And kids didn't spend all that much time at school. So, despite the protestations of some feminists, it made sense for women to stay home and have babies to contribute to the farm. Then, time later, World War II broke out, and all the men had to go off to war, and there was nobody left to build the airplanes. So women took those roles, and they got a lot of recognition and praise for having done this. And they found that, to their surprise, they really enjoyed having a career. They liked the camaraderie. They enjoyed the recognition they got from the culture, and they had a sense of accomplishment. That was something new to them. So they were having fun until the war ended. And guess what happened then? Of course, the men all came back and they had to go back to the house. And I've seen government propaganda films, I kid you not, that would make your jaw drop, that basically said, nice job, girls, but it's time to go home and get barefoot and pregnant again. And that's what they did. And that's why the baby boom generation, which I'm a part of, happened. And they were staying home and cleaning the house while watching commercials of women doing that in their high heels. Now, you might think they were spending a lot of time with their kids, but it's actually been shown in one study that they spent less time with their kids than a lot of working mothers do today, because the kids back then were all out playing all day long to get out of their parents' hair. Now, if you let your kids out to do that, you get labeled as a neglectful parent and you may even get arrested. So you can't do that. So, when did the children of these mothers come of age? Well, they came of age in the 60s. And what happened then? The feminist movement. So women at school were hearing these messages that women could now have exciting careers. They didn't even have to be nurses anymore. They could be doctors. They could be astronauts. They could be anything they wanted to be. And they were all excited about it. They'd come home and try to talk to their parents about it. But the parents, both of them, didn't really want to seem to talk about it that much because it kind of reminded them of their ambivalence. And I'm talking about the men too, because not all men love their jobs that much that they want to work full time for the rest of their life supporting the family. But if they were to say that they wanted the women to chip in, they would be labeled as, quote, whipped, unquote. That would be the end of that. So the daughters, but sons to some degree, would go off and just say, well, we can't talk about that. But things sort of happened in strange ways. Before they tried to talk about it, the mothers almost seemed to be pushing them in that direction, not overtly, not with anything they said, but just by their general attitude for what was happening. Well, these mothers were sort of living through their daughters. And as the daughters started to move toward a career, they would get vicarious satisfaction out of their daughter's behavior. But then later on, something changed because if the daughters did too well, the mothers would start to get envious. And often they even got depressed. This would alarm their children. And again, the children would try to talk about it, but this time the response was even worse. The parents would get angry at them and blame them for making a bunch of crazy accusations against them, and they would get very, very defensive. And in response, the children felt very invalidated and maybe a bit angry, depending on how direct the messages from the parents had been prior to this point. So why were the parents getting so defensive? Well, because they were ashamed. They were ashamed that they couldn't do what they really wanted to do, and they were protective of their own parents who had these attitudes to some degree. But the daughters didn't know anything about that because the parents refused to talk about it. But nonetheless, even though they were angry and feeling invalidated, the comments that the mom continued to make kind of fed into their feeling guilty, especially when it came to having children, because like I said, there were messages that mothers needed to do that and stay home with their children, and their mothers would make comments about how the children might not be doing that well at home, in addition to saying things like men don't really like smart women, so if they weren't already married, they might become they were told that they were going to become old maids, in so many words. And they would also hear negative remarks about work situations, like it doesn't matter how hard you try at work, women who are assertive get labeled as troublemakers, so it's not going to do you any good anyway. So like I said, it may not be directed specifically at the daughter. So the daughter finds that she's feeling guilty in both places because she's shortchanging everybody. Now, in response, at home particularly, the parents may overcompensate when they're spending the time that they do have with their children and become helicopter parents and try to solve all of their children's problems and be with them all that time, which is very bad for children who need to kind of learn how to make their own way in life and don't need parents to tell them that they can't do that. Not a good situation. And unfortunately, your parents are more powerful in changing your attitudes and shaping your attitudes about things like this than anybody else. There are actually cells in the primitive part of the brain, neurons, the fight, flight, and freeze part of the brain, particularly, that respond only to your parents' faces and nothing else. They're more powerful than therapists. I found that early in my career when I worked with families that are a lot more dysfunctional than the ones I'm discussing here. So what can you do? You're getting all these messages that are feeding into your guilt. Well, what you can do, although it's not easy, is to figure out ways to get parents to talk about it when they don't seem to want to. In order to do this, you have to get past their defensiveness. You have to research the family's background to find out exactly why they seem to have these conflictual attitudes in the first place, and then discuss it empathically with them without sounding critical. And it's not always easy to sound empathic when somebody is figuratively kicking you in the knee at the same time. So if you think there's an easy answer and an easy way to do this, I'm sorry, there isn't, but nonetheless, it can be done. Now, I can't discuss that here in any detail because it would take too long, but I do have a self-help book that goes into great detail about how to do this. The book is called Coping with Critical, Demanding, and Dysfunctional Parents, and it's available at all online booksellers, including Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And I think if you read this book, you'll be able to do this because you can do it. So I'll end here and thank you for listening.